And that brings us to Bizchat Weekly, and our introductory story is actually touching on a small business. This is an election year. How should businesses prepare themselves for an election year, and how do elections impact business? Now, a small business, let's just take a look at this particular clip from a small business, what they foresee for this particular year.
Being an election year, we have prepared ourselves. As you can see, we have bought extra machines because we anticipate the work will be a lot for the campaigning, but only God knows. As you can see, we don't have a party. We have all aspirants from Azimio, UDA, some are even independent. So we are open for anybody who will give us jobs, and we will do. It has been a tough year, but we are anticipating the year will be better.
That is Patrick Mwangi, Solid Impressions Branding. The gentleman says they look forward to an upbeat year for them being in the branding business as a small business. But Ken, I want to bring you into this particular conversation. Starting off, we have a business cycle in this country, and it runs in 5 years. Expound for us, is it 4.5 years of productivity, then some time remaining of this wait and see, then we resume productivity, or break it down for us?
You're absolutely right. We operate in 5-year cycles because our elections pretty come about after every 5 years. Typically, that tends to affect businesses in positive and in negative ways. As the gentleman in that video has shown, somebody in the printing business or in the event space might have a very good year, but somebody maybe in the real estate segment might have a not so good year. So when you're looking at Kenya's economic cycle, one has to factor in the impact of the uncertainty that is pretty much brought, and I think it's even much more this year, given that we don't have an incumbent and we are going to have a new president. So I think that generates sometimes even greater uncertainty. Definitely,
and that brings, let us take a hindsight into back in 2017, 2013, the impact that we've seen elections have on the business world. From your assessment, what have how has that impact been so far?
I think 2017 was a pretty difficult year because you remember prior to that, there was the interest rate cap that had come into place. So a lot of businesses had not been getting credit from banks. So in 2017 came in with the election cycle. It really brought, and that was a very difficult election. We had 2 elections and that Supreme Court ruling. So it only went till the early March 2018 when businesses, after that handshake, when there was a bit of that stability, because businesses thrive on stability. At the end of the day, when you buy stock, you want to know there's enough stability, there's enough security for your customers to come and consume that stock. So fundamentally what the leaders need to do right now is to reassure Kenyans that whichever way it goes, we'll have that continued stability, which is very important for business.
Indeed. And one of the acronyms we throw out there most of the times as economists, as business journalists, is GDP. Our GDP is projected to grow at this particular, and this gross domestic product, looking at its calculation, I think it has some elements that analyzing, since it's analyzing productivity of a country, we can assess what can be impacted in this particular period, a political period, or an election period vis-a-vis the other components. So break it down for us.
Well, GDP stands for gross domestic product, and really it is a summation of all the goods and services that our country produces. If you to break it down, you have about 4 components. You have what is called consumption. This is pretty much what you and I consume on a day-to-day basis. Then you have government spending, which has been taking the lion's share if you look at the roads and the infrastructure. Then you have investments. This is your businesses wanting to expand open new outlets. Then you have net exports. But of course, Kenya is a net importer. But you find countries such as Japan, which are net exporters, that is actually a big part of their economy. So in economics, you say C plus G plus I plus NX really puts down together. So when you come to an election here, is that investment pillar, because consumption remains the same. Your habits will not change. Government investment will continue, the roads will continue to be built, but it is that investment part. People who wanted to maybe buy a property or land and say, let me wait and see, particularly in areas that are hotspots, elections hotspots, and you say, this area is a hotspot, let me first see how the outcome is, then I'll buy. So you find it's that investment pillar of the composite that is typically most affected.
Then our economy is hugely and highly informal. Lots of businesses, informal sector. In terms of impact of and the political risk, on businesses, does it impact differently based on whether it's formal or informal?
It affects both. I think on the formal side, it affects in terms of certainty, the fact that you can't really predict 6 months into the future. On the informal side, it's more about the tension on the ground. I remember in 2018 when Baba was coming from the airport and I was coming for this particular interview, and getting here it was very difficult. I mean, I was sweating by the time I was getting to the gate here because of the events out there. So it's that tension that sometimes people say, I don't want to get out of my house because I don't know if I'll come back safe. So that affects the informal sector. So areas where there is the Juakali sector and people are talking politics, which can be very emotive, such situations can get very volatile very, very quickly. And so it's for them, it's more of the security and tension that really the government has to consistently try to reassure them that there'll be much more peace.
All right, definitely. And I want to bring in Mahor Ndoho. Mr. Ndoho, I mean, we're just touching on the business cycles that you experience every 5 years. Break it down for us, because from analysis, we tend to have close to 2 or 3 years of productivity, then spend a couple of years in anticipation, and then another couple of maybe 1 year post-election also not being very productive. How is your assessment of that?
Well, I think that's why you'll see there's also a lot of movement in the political sphere to find ways to fix that. Because the reality is you cannot have, in a 5-year cycle, really 3 years of sustained growth, and then you have to reset basically for 18 months to 2 years. So in a sense, there's that element of changing the way our governance structure is, so that people have a more predictable long-term future in terms of a year. And if you look at our GDP growth, what my brother was saying, it has started to be a very zigzag line, very precisely because of our election cycles. And so it's actually imperative even to our political leaders to find solutions to how that works, so that you always have consistent growth. And in some ways, I think it's also why there's been a bias towards what, again, Ken was saying about investments, especially government investments, because those tend to be fairly strong and tend to give us at least a sustainable underlay to the economic growth. The problem with that, of course, is that it's not sustainable indefinitely.
And Mr. Ndoho, in terms of the formal vis-a-vis informal sectors of the economy, do you think the reaction to the political risk varies?
Yes, it certainly does. You know, because the formal sector also is also sensitive to, it's also very closely tied to foreign investment. And even where your own business may not be directly involved in foreign investment, it is involved in terms of importing materials. If you look at our manufacturing, it's involved in exporting even our raw materials, our horticulture, for example. So the formal sector, by and large, tends to take its cue also from what the foreign rating in terms of a risk rating is. And also the formal sector also has a fairly strong sense of risk management. And so those sort of things are planned into their financial plannings. And that means also that by doing that, then they factor in the fact that there will be years when it's wise not to invest, to wait and see how the political space goes. The informal one, it's basically survival. You have to live, you have to eat every day. So the informal sector in some ways is more resilient. No Kenyan is, most of Kenyans in the informal sector are not about to run away anywhere. So they have to make it work.
All right.
And so that makes it, for, in a sense, more resilient.
Okay. And I want to bring in Odhiambo Ramogi. Mr. Ramogi, I mean, we were having this chat, and you know, you say that now you can be an editor after posting this on this group, analyzing political risks pertaining to businesses in an election year, which is quite interesting. From your assessment so far, the way we've handled the political year as the business community, what do you foresee for the year 2022?
I'm a hopeful Kenyan. I'm really hopeful that we have grown. This economy is more resilient towards the risks and shocks associated with an election cycle or an election year for that matter. And so I do not see much of a change in terms of our economic trajectory, affected by the elections, so to speak. In terms of even the inflationary pressures that are associated with the monies exchanging hands during an election, the CBK has been very firm in terms of sweeping and mopping the market, and the high interest rates that they have maintained so far is geared towards managing that as well. And so I'm hopeful. Of course, there's the risks here and there of small businesses being affected by political rallies, by upheavals here and there, and that will be there. In terms of how we've managed it so far so good, Noah. I'm really hopeful.
Definitely. Ken, as we enter the tail end of this discussion, for businesses, I know there are businesses owners watching this particular conversation. How do you buffer your business even better to put it in a position where it's not the normal, you know, anticipation of wait and see, things might slump down? How would you advise a business?
Well, it's a bit difficult because most businesses depend on demand. For example, a hotel will require the demand from customers. Okay. So if customers are not coming, there's nothing you can do to be able to do that. Maybe you can reassure them that our facilities are well secured. In the event, you could improve your marketing to show people that we have some security capabilities if it happens. But I think from a deeper perspective, our businesses now need to be a bit more involved in also the election cycle. And I think if businesses are organized, for example, in the umbrella groups, such as KEPSA, they should be able to even invite all the presidential candidates to have a debate on their economic pillars. Okay. That's what you see in other countries, where every candidate comes to discuss their economic pillar, and the private sector should be able to say, from an economic perspective, these manifestos made the most sense. So I think that kind of activism, I think, would also be welcome. Definitely.
Wow, gentlemen, I know. Time is always the limiting factor, but we have to close Bizchat weekly right there. Thank you very much, Ken Gishinga, Wahorondoho, Odhiambo Ramogi, on your input on Bizchat weekly on matters political risk on businesses during an electioneering year. We take a short break right now on Business Today. When you come back, we have BBC Money Daily. Stay tuned.